Well, as we've seen in the past, college sports continues to change year by year, and as always, there's something new. We go from NIL to conference realignment, along with revenue sharing in the future. So much to look forward to, and a lot of that falls in the play of the NCAA President Charlie Baker. And our very own Brandon Marcello had a chance to catch up with him about the future of college sports this morning.
NCAA President Charlie Baker joining us. President Baker, thank you for the time. You know, I've been covering the House settlement, it seems like, for forever, and everything that's been changing with the NCAA and the conferences themselves. But I read a recent report from the Knight Commission about Olympic sports and the effect we've seen after the House settlement. And we've seen 37 Olympic sports cut across the NCAA structure at different universities. What kind of immediate feedback have you been receiving here in these last few months about just the future health a lot of these programs in the Olympic sport ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would point out, and first of all, thanks for having me. The ecosystem in college sports is enormous, which I think people forget sometimes. You're talking about 500,000 student athletes across 1,100 schools. 365 schools in Division I, about 260,000 athletes there, and I think you're going to see all kinds of schools are going to do all kinds of things to comply with or to engage in the House settlement in whatever way they think makes sense for them and for their student athletes and their programs. And I'm pretty sure that over time you're going to see a lot more kids scholarship in Olympic sports, because we had limits on how many scholarships people could write before, and a lot of schools have already committed to doing significant increases in their scholarships. And you'll see schools make decisions about deciding to go deep and to go big into certain sports and not into others. And I think at the end of the day, Olympic sports in the U.S. will be very alive and well coming out of all this. And I think but I do think schools are going to make decisions, and I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think the kind of benefits that we're talking about here that will be made available to student athletes generally, we're talking billions of dollars of additional benefits, and I think that's a good thing. And in fact, some respects, long overdue.
As part of the House settlement, the autonomy conferences were charged with creating a new kind of governing body to kind of oversee the settlement terms. They're calling it the College Sports Commission. They're going to be handling a lot, obviously, of the enforcement, the governance of the House settlement, which deals with a lot of the issues, I guess, college sports, so to speak, have been facing with NIL and everything. Having said that, what do you foresee the future of the NCAA enforcement arm being? Is it going to be as large as it has been, or do you feel like you might have to shrink it in the future as a result of the CSC handling a lot of the workload there?
Well, keep in mind that the CSC is basically going to be responsible for what I call the money stuff. It's going to be responsible for the cap management system and compliance with the cap management system, where schools in Division I can offer up to $20 million in NIL benefits to their student athletes. It's going to oversee the third-party NIL program, which for the first time we're actually going to have real data and a process around NIL and an arbitration process if there are disputes that sits inside that injunction. And they'll oversee the roster management program, again, for Division I. But you know, the playing rules, season lengths, academic eligibility generally, playing rules obviously involves things like cheating, all the issues around sports betting, health and wellness for student athletes, all that stuff is still going to be inside the NCAA umbrella. And I think in some ways, one of the benefits of this settlement is by putting it inside, putting the money stuff that you just mentioned inside this injunction, and creating an arbitration process and an actual mechanism to collect data and hopefully issue reports on what's going on, people are going to know more about what's going on than they've known before. And since it sits inside an injunction, there's actually a federal commitment to it that didn't exist before. And finally, that arbitration process to resolve disputes hopefully will reduce some of the litigation that's dominated so much of these conversations over the last few years. So I think we're going to be doing the stuff we care about most: championships, integrity of sport, health and safety for student athletes, and the commission's going to worry about the money stuff. And I think this is actually a pretty good split.
What's your confidence level right now that we're going to see a lot of these House settlement terms, so to speak, be codified legislatively? And we're seeing more movement now in Washington than ever with the SCORE Act. Do you believe that we might have something in place on the federal level as soon as by the end of this year?
You know, the only thing that's more dangerous than predicting what's going to happen in college sports is predicting what's going to happen in Washington. I guess what I would say is I think the Sport Act is a big statement, in part because it's one of the first times we've ever seen a piece of legislation move this far, but it's also got Democrat support as well as Republican support. For me, the most important thing is it deals with the employment question, which has been hanging around out there for a really long time, and especially for all your D2 and D3 schools, which actually have more athletes than D1. And for many of your D1 schools, that's a really important piece of sort of solving one of the big issues that's a huge, talk about Olympic sports, you know, you turn everybody into an employee and it will have profoundly negative impact on Olympic sports. Also gets rid of what I think of as the 30 or 45 different state laws about how sports are supposed to work in each state, most of which are designed to give the schools in particular states advantages over other states, deals with the preemption issue associated with that, and then finally gives the NCAA some limited liability protection to write and enforce rules. And it's conditional, which I think is appropriate and probably time limited as well. But I think the opportunity here for the Sport Act to do some very good things for college sports is quite high. We'll see what happens going forward. I hesitate to try to predict how things in Washington like this ultimately play out. But it's very encouraging. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, I know you've obviously have spent a lot of time, a lot of career in government, and as we see with any piece of legislation, you'll see other people, not necessarily I say sneaking in other things into a bill, but they try to get other things added in there. Are there any concerns about that? Because I've been hearing and been reporting that there's even some thought about trying to include something in there about the Sports Broadcasting Act that would help pave the way for FBS conferences to bundle their media rights together, so to speak. Is there anything else out there that concerns you to maybe be put in that bill?
Look, I'm really interested in the three things I talked about: dealing with the employment question, giving us some ability to deal with limited, to write rules and have the ability to actually enforce them on a limited liability basis. And the third is to preempt these just enormous number of state laws that are floating around out there that really make it very hard to create level playing fields, not just for us, but also for the conferences. You know, honestly, the rest of it is kind of falls into a who knows category. I think generally speaking, it's more likely than not that we'll be successful in getting legislation passed if it's limited. I think the more things you add to it, in some respects, the harder it becomes to actually get something done.
Recently, the autonomy conferences were giving more voting control in a lot of committees within the NCAA structure, about 65% voting control, as you know. Do you believe that giving them a little bit more power diminishes potentially the threat of, there's been talk among ADs and everything about maybe we should break away from the NCAA or create our own football-only situation that's away from the NCAA structure? Do you believe that diminishes that possibility?
Well, you keep in mind that we'd put together a working group to actually make a recommendation to the D1 board about how to deal with the governance stuff post-settlement, all right? That was the sort of issue that drove this conversation in the first place. And we had 18 members on that working group. 10 of them were FBS, 8 of them were from the A4, and 8 members from the 1AAA schools and the FCS schools. And basically, the working group came up with this model that created the weighted voting percentages. It also adds a significant voice for student athletes on almost all NCAA committees. But the two other things it does, it gets rid of a lot of committee structure, and it significantly reduces the size of the committees. You know, I'm a healthcare and government guy, as you pointed out. I spent a lot of my career in government. I've never seen a decision-making model as complicated and as difficult as the NCAA Division I model. And, you know, the simplicity of this one, the streamlining, the change in the size of the committees, and the and the additional voices for student athletes, as well as some of the weighted voting stuff, this is all about making it possible for us to like make decisions. I mean, a huge part of why so much of what we've been doing for the last couple of years feels like it's rushed is because, you know, we went years without dealing with and solving a lot of these issues to sort of bring the NCAA into the 21st century. And I think in some ways, where we've landed on this is going to give us a committee structure going forward that's going to be able to make decisions, to represent the membership, okay? I mean, everybody who's going to be on these committees is going to be there to represent particular voices, which I think is important. And I think the added voices for the student athletes will be really important. So the breakaway thing, my goal from the time I got there was, you know, the NCAA and the membership generally work well because we are a, you know, community of organizations that make different decisions about how big they're going to play in certain sports and how heavy they're going to invest and where they want to be great. And, you know, walking in the door, my goal was to make sure that that family stays together because I think it works better that way. I mean, I don't know how you do some of the great things we do in championships, March Madness, many of our other championships, if you don't have everybody under the tent.
A lot of chatter out there, as you know, about expanding the men's basketball tournament in March Madness. Yep. No decision upcoming for this year. But do you believe that's inevitable in some ways? And do you believe an expanded format helps smaller schools, or does it help the bigger schools?
So the answer to that one, you'll love this, is probably yes. I think it helps everybody. I mean, it bothers me that, first of all, we have 32 automatic qualifiers, right? We have 32 conferences in Division I. Every school that wins their tournament, conference tournament, gets into the tournament. I love that. That's where a lot of the Cinderellas come from. It's a big and important part of the program. But because we have 32 automatic qualifiers, that currently only leaves us, you know, 36 other seats for what could be as many as 40 or 50 schools that are among the 50 or 60 best in the country. And so every year there are schools on the bubble. We talk about the bubble. That you kind of wish could get into the tournament. I mean, it bothered me that St. John's a couple years ago didn't get into the tournament. They had a couple of really bad early season losses. But they're the only team that gave UConn a game at the end of the season. They played UConn in the Big East tournament and almost beat them. They were a worthy team and probably should have gotten into the tournament. It killed me that Indiana State didn't get in a few years ago because they lost to Drake in their conference tournament. They ended up going, you know, to the finals in the NIT and lost to Seton Hall in the finals. Another team that probably should have been in the tournament. So from my point of view, part of the expansion piece is about giving some of those worthy programs that are definitely among the 50 or 60 best in the country an opportunity to get into the tournament and to see what they can do without having to change the nature of the way the AQ process works, which is where in many cases some of the greatest first-round upsets of all time come from.
You've got a lot on your plate. I can't imagine the schedule you have every day. So thank you so much for the time, President Baker.
It's nice to see you, Brendan. Have a good one.
All right, you too.
Brandon Marcello getting all the X's and O's there with the president. But, of course, you can catch him along with the College Football Insiders. There's a new pod here when it comes to everybody across the country tapping in all season long. The guys having their preseason a couple days ago with that first episode. But as you see it, use that QR code to tap in and watch now live. Don't forget, when it comes to college football, we are the home here when it comes to everything on the gridiron this season. We're not that far away from week 0. Also subscribe and wherever you get that listen on YouTube.